Good news is we have an amazing music ministry. The bad news is I have to follow it. Okay. We are going to miss you, But what? Oh, so I guess some of you aren't plugged into Facebook, right? Ashley has been awarded a scholarship to the Manhattan School of Music, where she is going, where she is going to go and get her MFA, right? Master of Music. In vocal jazz. So there you have it. Yeah. Right. We'll still have Steve. Yes, but yeah. We're not. No, we're not. We're glad we at least get half of you. And Ashley's going to continue to work with us as far as programming our music because she's a lot better with lyrics for some reason. Yeah. We're not going to be alone. We're not going to be left alone. Yeah. For how long? 2 years. Although she gets, some time off for good behavior, summers and Christmases and maybe stuff like that. But anyway, to me, the sign of a good church is one that raises up its bright and best and sends them out to do great things in the world. And when I say I want this to be an equipping ministry, that's exactly what I mean. I mean, there are going to be people that we build up and, go off to do great things, just like Reverend Christine is in Chattanooga. I mean, it's exactly what we want. There are moments when people move on and we feel pain. We feel as if we have suffered a loss, but in truth, there's no loss because the net gain to the universe keeps on rolling. And as long as we keep giving, we can't outgive the universe. So great things are going to happen. And we will have more great musicians. And, maybe we'll send some of them to New York too. You never know. Yeah. Well, we may do some, actually we probably will do some swapping with Christine. We're going to send them the Roberts here pretty soon. And we're actually going to have Source come down for that weekend. It's next weekend. No, next weekend. So, wow, I should have had that in the announcements, right. Okay, so there you have it. Next weekend, Source. Don't miss it. But anyway, what was I supposed to talk about today? You're not alone, yes. Okay, this book. Okay, thank you. We're studying this book. And, yeah. Oh, shiny object. I'm easily sidetracked. We're right in the middle of our series on The Eye of the Storm by Reverend Dr. Gary Simmons. And for those of you who've been following us either, on Sunday mornings or coming to class on Wednesday night or maybe just reading the book, I think you're probably beginning to get a sense of how important what he has to say in this actually is to us. We used to, before we were rebranded and became a Positive Path for Spiritual Living, Unity used to be referred to, Unity used to be referred to as positive, practical Christianity. I like that. It's like, it's not just something that's going to be good for me when I die, but something I can use today, right here, right now. Stuff that actually makes my life today, life in the kingdom of heaven. What a concept. Isn't that what Jesus was talking about? I think it was. And this book is just chock full of some of the stuff that's really going to set us free if we actually do more than just read it. Okay, there's a lot of work to be done. Now, they took this same work that's in the book and said, this is pretty tough stuff. We need to help folks do this. And that's how they came up with the Q Effect, which is the workshop that Reverend Christine gave for some of the church leadership in April. And she's going to be doing another version or another iteration of it in July, and then another one later in the year. And we strongly encourage everyone to do that work because it will really get at what is eating your lunch. Okay? And that's the point of all this, is to be able to, put down your baggage, let go of your stuff, start responding instead of reacting, and really being able to live in this kingdom of heaven that's available right here and right now. So when last we left off, in the eye of the storm, we were getting ready to talk about some of the things that are the reasons there's a storm to begin with. And as he opens chapter 5, Gary talks about something he calls the 4 winds of conflict. And just like with a storm, where you have pressure and you have competing air masses and, humidity and all those meteorological things that I don't know any more good words for. You have all those things that come together and combine to create a storm. We have things in our own consciousness that also do that. And when we are aware of them, we have the ability not to simply let them whip us into a frenzy. And the first one is one we talk about in unity all the time because it's kind of exactly the opposite of what our name is, and that's separation. And I've talked about separation on some other occasions, and kind of where does it come from in the human experience? And Gary talks a little bit about what happens to us right when we're born. And that is certainly where it all begins, that idea of a sense of separation, at least for these human bodies. There we were riding along, completely not separated, completely connected, right? Completely surrounded by this loving entity, provided with our every need. And then all of a sudden, bang, we get punched out into this, cold place. Somebody hits us on the bum, and things kind of go downhill from there. We try to tell them what we want. They don't get it right most of the time, right? They're sticking bottles in our faces when we really just want to be held, or, holding us when we're really hungry, and it just doesn't work out. Ultimately, what happens is we come to a sense of separation. And it's interesting the way that he describes what that is. It's actually our feeling of our own self, of our sense of separateness, comes about as a defense mechanism because we have been so disappointed by putting ourselves out there, by opening our hearts, by being vulnerable, by saying, I'm the baby, gotta love me, and not having it happen. And so we begin this journey of separate identity that most of us carry through the rest of our lives from those first, incongruencies and inconsistencies with our caregivers. In fact, what he says is that separation is an effect of being born into an imperfect caregiving environment. Right? So now all of us who are parents are like, oh, it's my fault. Right? Or some of us anyway. I know as a parent, I really was not prepared. I hadn't read the books. I did not do the homework. I just made stuff up. I tried not to be as bad as, as my dad was. And I almost made it. But we all do that. We all grow up with imperfect parents, and all those of us who become parents become imperfect parents. Some of us do a little better than others, and, yay for that. I knew when I'd met Christine that I'd met someone who was a lot better at parenting than I was, and it's been very illuminating for me to be her partner, and to watch her interact with her kids, to watch them interact with one another. That sense of separation leads to a lot of things. And one of the things that it leads right straight into is codependency, which I thought was interesting for Gary to bring up. And it's funny how when we say, okay, I'm separate from you, But then we get to this place of, and I need something from you. Because at the core of our sense of separation is the idea that we're missing something. You know, we have this disbelief in our own innate wholeness. And that's one of the things that kind of led us to that sense of separation. It's like, I'm hungry. I'm not whole. I'm hungry, you know, and nobody shows up. Or, I'm uncomfortable because, you know, I need my diaper changed, and nobody shows up. So we get this pervading sense of incompleteness, of not rightness, of not quite there-ness. And when we kind of figure out that we're not getting it from ourselves, we look for somebody else. So what we let our environment, our experience, our judgments do is kind of cheat us into the idea that something outside us is going to fix us. And that's where codependency comes from. It's interesting that it something that is, you know, codependent stems from separation. Anyway, the second wind that he describes is misperception. And boy, you know, one of the things he says is at the beginning is that at every conflict that happens between people has some level of misperception in it. And I would say that is absolutely dead spot on. You know, because if we at least completely understood one another, we might be a little more apt to say, okay, but I agree to disagree. I totally understand the attraction of chocolate, but I dig vanilla. We can be good with that, right? Rather than getting into who's right and who's wrong. Which, when we're all looking through different lenses, you know, if we want to get judgy about it, well, we're all right and we're all wrong. And what Gary says, and I would say I absolutely agree with, is that we all end up coming with our own framework of belief. That what we end up having is from, you know, our own bodily experiences. Some of us actually see color differently. Like some people can't see colors. Some people see colors, you know, in different shades. I might look at the same color swatch and see one thing, and Christine could look at it and see something completely different, right? We've all had different experiences. Even siblings growing up, sometimes when I talk with my brother or my sister, you know, I wonder, it's like, were we in the same house? Now, there are some things that, yeah, we kind of have the same memory of, but some of them vastly different. It's like, how is that possible? You know, and then we go out in the world and we try to interact not just with people who grew up with the same background or the same belief systems or the same values, but now we're a global community. You know, we're doing our best to rub elbows and you know, make sense with people from halfway around the world. And it can be a challenge. You know, I know when I was in the Middle East, as the guy in charge of the contracts for our post, I had to work with the contractors, many of whom were, you know, Middle Eastern. And there was no way we could begin to talk about business for the first 15 minutes to half an hour. You know, we would sit down and we'd have tea, you know, ask about the kids. And then finally, you know, when you sort of run out of that sort of thing to talk about, we'd get into the actual business. That's just the way they did business. I mean, you know, me personally, I'd have just gone in and said, okay, what's up? Here's this, boom, and, you know, in and out in 5 minutes. Yeah, that's not the way that worked. And had I not been willing, at least, to try looking through a different lens, we would have probably come into some conflicts over very simple misperceptions. I know that Christine and I, because we are as different as we are, sometimes when we're having a conversation, we actually have to just stop and say, okay, what was it you meant when you just said that? Or, when I said this, what did you hear me say? Because we fill in the blanks and we assign meaning that are so very different. It's one of the things that is so dangerous about digital communication, about texts and emails. Boy, can people take those the wrong way. Have you noticed that? Is it just me? Is it just the way I write emails? Right? Yeah, Joan's laughing. We've had some fun with email. And it's all our perceptions. Somebody can write something thinking that's a perfectly nice thing to write. Maybe even helpful. Helpful's not good, especially in emails, I'll tell you. Anyway. Yeah, right? So, yeah. At least knowing that we perceive the world very differently from that person next to us. Not just that person halfway around the world, but that person right in front of us. Whether it's our partner or our child or someone in the work world, they have a very different lens, a very different filter, a very different background, experience, education, belief system, ability to understand. And it's never a bad idea when you're in doubt to just double check with someone and say, okay, what did you think I meant by that? Just straighten things out. The third wind that Gary describes is one called competition. And, in our separateness, and this is especially the piece with competition, in our own incompleteness, we can become extremely competitive. I must confess that I have an extremely competitive nature, or I have had an extremely competitive nature. I am learning to be a gracious loser and to simply enjoy playing the game. But for a long, long time, when I was playing a game, it didn't matter what it was. Cards, dominoes, Monopoly, Dungeons and Dragons, Axis and Allies, I was out for blood. And I wanted to win. So as I've become a little more, and what's really funny is that I get into playing games with my wife, who could care less. She really could care less. And she beats me every time. We got this really great game called The Settlers of Catan. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. So it's kind of like a board game, but you're trying to build stuff instead of blow stuff up. And I swear, it's like she always keeps saying, I don't know if I want to play that. It's too complicated and whatever. And she beats us every time. Every time. But it's because I think once she gets into it, she loves playing the game. And, there are things that we do as human beings where I think competition can be a good thing. So when I say that one of the winds of conflict is competition, don't hear me necessarily, saying that competition is always bad. I look at, but it can be taken too far, I think about something simple like football. And I know how people can get here, about the Iron Bowl, for example. Wouldn't it be wonderful if at some point when somebody asks you, so who you want to win the game, you could simply say, whoever plays the best this time. Right? Yeah, as if. I'll tell you, my alma mater, West Virginia, we had a real big rivalry game that, when we went off into a different conference, we don't play Pitt anymore. But the Pitt-West Virginia game was played for over 100 years. And it's called the Backyard Brawl because the two campuses are about 90 miles apart, and there is no love lost between Pitt and WVU, trust me. So I actually took my kids and their mother, this has been many years ago, to the Pitt game one year. We drove up from Florida and visited a little bit with family, and I took them to the Pitt game. Well, it goes to triple overtime. Yeah, right? You got a couple of little kids who've never been to a ball game anyway. It's cold. Triple overtime. And, at the end of triple overtime, we lose. But as we're walking out, now, because I bought my tickets online or whatever, I was actually stuck with some Pitt fans. As we're walking out, I hear a couple of Pitt fans talking to each other, and one of them said to the other one, you hate to see anybody lose a game like that. And that's the kind of spirit that I think really brings out the best in us, that it's really about the love of what we're doing, not the fact that we can beat someone else. Someone else, yeah, it is. It's all about beating them. I remember watching Brett Favre and Warren Sapp go at each other when Tampa Bay and Green Bay used to play each other. And, those are two guys that really wanted to win, but they loved playing each other because playing against each other brought out the best in themselves. But the thing is when we get into competitions in relationships, when we get into competitions in conflict, what happens is there aren't any winners. Because essentially what happens is the person who wins is simply reinforcing in themselves the idea that they needed something that they had to get outside of themselves. I was missing something. I had to win this to get it. And so all they've done is dug that a little deeper in. And that leads us to the fourth wind, which is defensiveness. And one of the things that Gary points out so well, I think, is that we as human beings can sense defensiveness in one another without even saying a word. The energy field of a human being, when we are in that defensive posture, our energy field actually shrinks. When we come into a room with someone who is in that space, we immediately respond to it. We become defensive. And, in that, it is so easy to create conflict. I love how he says that defensiveness implies the presence of an adversary. It's interesting that we renamed the Department of War, which is a pretty honest name, the Department of Defense. But that implies that there's somebody out to get us. What if we didn't believe that? What if we didn't believe that and we acted from that place? It'd be an interesting way to run the railroad. So really, when those four winds kind of blow in unison is when we can really get ourselves out into the storm, away from the center, away from ourselves, away from that I, the I am that is in the center, in the peace. The thing is we have the ability to go past everything we've learned. We have the ability to go beyond our experience of separation. We have the ability to move beyond our experiences and the sum total of everything that we've learned. We have the ability to transcend. And that is why we are here. That's why I'm standing here. That's why you guys are sitting here, I think. The ability to transcend what I've been up till right now. I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to do better. So, as we move on, Gary says that there are 4 attributes of wholeness, and understanding our own wholeness is key to all of this. Those 4 attributes, and we're going to talk about them over the next couple of weeks, are communion, principle, purpose, and non-resistance. Communion speaks to that whole idea that we are not alone and we never were. I know for many of us, communion started out as either, wafers and wine or bread and grape juice. And that's what that word meant. But what it really means is a shared experience, a deeply shared experience with God, ourselves, and one another. When we can come together in common union to be something that is greater than, the sum of each of us. It's almost the exact opposite of conflict. Now, one of the things that Gary points out in there that can really mess your communion up is judgment. And going all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, when we think about the fall of man, and I think I've described this before, okay, if we don't take that whole story literally, and we don't, all right, when Adam and Eve, who represent humanity, eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that's when they fall away. So think about that. Knowledge of good and evil is essentially the ability to judge. The minute we stop being in what is, simply experiencing it, riding along with it, and doing our part with it, the minute we stop saying bad, good, bad, bad, we're separate. And that was the fall of man from paradise. Because if we had not picked up that ability, we would be in communion with ourselves, with God, and one another. I wouldn't ever think anything bad about myself if I didn't, have that knowledge wired in there. I wouldn't think anything bad about any of you. I try not to. I usually don't. And I wouldn't get mad at God, which I have done from time to time. The universe. Discernment and deciding, is this healthy for me? Is this right for me? That's okay. We have the ability to make decisions, to make choices. But when we get into judgment, particularly when we get into judgment with one another, we not just risk creating conflict, we foment conflict. When it would be so much easier to simply say, isn't that interesting? Well, that's fascinating. Not the way I would do it, but kind of cute. As we come together, it's a challenge. And yet, this idea that we are willing to find the quiet place within us and through that reach out to one another, it's really the only hope this world has. That's all we've got. Because the way that we've been doing it, the way of the sword, the way of conflict, the storm, it's just not working. And the good thing is we know we have some amazing teachings that have been brought to us through the ages by some very wonderful people. And we have people today, like you, who are willing to do the work, to transcend, to be more, to live from a place of peace. This week, what I would invite you to do as we work our way on through the eye of the storm is as judgments or conflicts come up, simply ask yourself, is this something I've believed? Is there something inside me I think I need, or that I don't have that I think I need? What is it about this that's coming from me? And then ask, is it really important? You are not alone. You've never been alone, and you never will be alone. And I'm so glad you decided to come out and play today. Thank you.